The worst thing that happened to me at 50 was not losing my husband or my job. It wasn't even losing my home. It was realizing that fear had built my entire life and still couldn't save it. If you clicked on this because you want to know what happened at 50, I'll tell you. But what matters even more is what it taught me. I'm 85 years old now, and I can tell you this with complete honesty. Fear does not protect your life. It only makes it smaller. For a long time, I never saw myself as a fearful person. I just thought I was being responsible, practical, doing what a decent woman was supposed to do. I kept the peace. I stayed loyal. I tried not to ask for too much, and I definitely avoided saying things that would make people uncomfortable. I just stayed where things were familiar, even when they were no longer good for me. At the time, I called it maturity. Now I call it what it really was: fear. I was terrified of rejection. I hated conflict. The thought of starting over or ending up alone kept me up at night. I was so scared of making one big mistake that I just built my whole life around avoiding pain. And for a while, living like that can actually look like wisdom. It can even look like success. From the outside, my life looked perfectly stable. I had a marriage, a career, a nice home, routines, a life that made total sense to everybody else. But there is a massive difference between a life that looks stable and a life that actually feels true. Mine looked stable, but it didn't feel true. I was constantly adjusting myself to fit the room, swallowing how I really felt, always picking the safest option over the honest one. And when you live that way for long enough, you begin to disappear so gradually that even you don't notice it's happening. Then I turned 50, and within one single year, the life I had spent decades trying to hold together just collapsed. My husband left, and it wasn't after some giant dramatic fight or a sudden betrayal. He left after years of distance, silence, two people just living beside each other without ever really meeting. And the painful truth is, I was lonely long before he ever walked out that door. A few months after that, I lost my job. The company restructured, and my position was simply eliminated, just like that. If you have ever tied your entire self-worth to being useful, you know exactly what that does to you. It doesn't just take away your paycheck, it takes your identity. Then came the hardest part. Without 2 incomes, and with my whole world shifting, I had to sell the house I thought would carry me safely into old age. That house was my proof. It was my proof that I had done life correctly. And suddenly, it was gone too. So when I say I lost everything at 50, I don't mean that lightly. My marriage ended, my career was wiped out, and I had to pack up my home. And for a little while, I really thought I had lost myself. That was the terrifying part. Not just the fact that my circumstances changed, but that I no longer knew who I was without all those things I had spent years trying to protect. And this is the part I really need you to hear. Those losses were incredibly painful, but they were not the deepest wound. The deepest wound was realizing that I had spent most of my adult life obeying fear, and it hadn't saved me from losing everything anyway. That truth broke something open in me, because for my entire life I had been so careful. I was constantly watching my words. I hid what I needed and buried my dreams. I didn't even let myself get angry. I just kept my truth locked away. I honestly believed fear was helping me keep my life together. But it wasn't building a life. It was building a cage. And when that cage finally fell apart, I was forced to look in the mirror and ask a question I should have asked decades earlier. What do I actually want? Not what will upset the fewest people. Not what looks respectable or feels the safest. What is true? That single question changed me. Not in a week, and definitely not in one beautiful cinematic moment. It changed me slowly and honestly, painfully. Because when you finally stop hiding behind your roles and your routines, you have to face exactly how much of yourself you gave away. I had to admit that I'd been confusing silence with peace. I thought being needed meant I was loved. I mistook enduring a bad situation for being strong. And worst of all, I thought my fear was actually wisdom. A lot of people do that. Maybe you do too. Maybe you tell yourself you're just being realistic. You call it patience or loyalty. But if your entire world is organized around avoiding discomfort, then fear is still sitting in the driver's seat. And fear is incredibly expensive. It strips away your voice. It messes with your timing. It slowly chips away at your self-respect. And if you let it run things long enough, it literally costs you years of your life. That is exactly why I don't share my story as a tragedy. I tell it as a warning. Because losing everything at 50 was horrible. But do you know what would have been worse? Living that exact same half-life for another 30 years without ever questioning it. Just keeping my mouth shut, doing the expected thing. Dying without ever finding out who I was underneath all that anxiety. That would have been worse, much worse. The strange thing is, after the dust settled, I actually became a much more honest person. At first, it was just because I had absolutely no energy left to pretend. But eventually, honesty started to feel like freedom. I started saying no when I actually meant no. I admitted when my feelings were hurt. I began figuring out what I wanted instead of just running around trying to fulfill everyone else's needs. Those might sound like tiny details to you. They aren't. For some of us, that is the beginning of a whole new life. It certainly was for me. And no, I didn't magically become fearless. That's not how it works. At 85, there are still plenty of things that scare me. But I finally learned the difference between feeling fear and obeying it. That distinction changes everything. You can be terrified and still tell the truth. You can be scared to death and still walk away from something that's breaking you. You can be afraid and still start over. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is simply refusing to let fear make all your decisions. I really wish I had learned that earlier, before I turned 50, before I built a whole world that looked completely safe from the outside, but was empty on the inside. But I learned it when I learned it. And if my voice can save you even a few years of hiding, then doing this video is worth it. So if there is a situation in your life right now that you know in your gut isn't right, stop trying to talk yourself out of it. If there's a truth you keep postponing, please stop pretending that waiting is harmless. Waiting is not harmless. Later eventually becomes your life. And one day, if you put things off long enough, you'll wake up completely surrounded by the consequences of all the things you were too afraid to face. I know, because I lived it. At 50, my husband left, my job disappeared, and I sold my home. But the actual loss happened way before that. The real tragedy was every single year I spent abandoning myself just to keep things comfortable. That is what I mourn, and it's what I am praying you don't repeat. Because here is the absolute truth. from an 85-year-old woman who finally stopped lying to herself. The life you save by shrinking yourself is not really your life. It is just survival dressed up as responsibility. Real life begins the second you stop asking fear for permission. So if you are scared right now, I completely understand. But please don't wait for your world to fall apart before you get honest. Don't wait until the pain is so bad it literally forces the truth out of you. Start today. Have that conversation. Make the change. Set the boundary. Walk away if you have to. Wake up before your life has to completely collapse just to get your attention. Thank you for being here with me today. If anything I said resonated with you, please subscribe. We can have more honest conversations like this. And I'd love it if you told me in the comments, what has fear cost you in your own life? And what are you finally ready to change?